Samar, yes, everyone is excited for this webinar. Many people were waiting for very specific early years webinar. So assessment during online learning for our early years educator. Finally, it's taking place this week. And we have Duane Smith, who's an educational consultant. So Duane, can we move forward to the following slide? So remember, we are going to ask you at several moments to pause and reflect. The reflection will be taking place via the chat. Remember in the chat, everyone, please to put all panelists and attendees. And if you have any question, feel free to send your question in the question and answers. So Duane, it's your turn. Please feel free to introduce yourself and let's start this webinar together.
Great, thanks, Ali. As I was saying to you and Stefan just before we got going, it's a great opportunity for me, really. I've been excited in the preparation of this particular webinar because it's one of those things, assessment in the virtual or online learning. What does it really look like? And I've done a lot of searching around myself with colleagues to find out what their perspectives are. So I'm looking forward to hearing perspectives of others during the webinar today. A little bit about me. Yes, I was born in Australia. So as you said before, Ali, a little bit late for the Aussies to be out watching this, but they can do it on YouTube, I'm sure. But I'm currently living in Cyprus. So it's been a great opportunity for me to base myself here because I'm currently an early years education consultant working in various different countries with lots of different schools. Dubai, Vietnam, mainly IB schools. I've had quite a few years in education, various roles as a curriculum leader. But most recently, I did go back into the classroom in Istanbul and I spent 5 years as a early years 4 and 5 teacher. So that was great to actually go back and on the ground level and see what's happening in schools. So a lot of what you'll hear today will be based on my experience in the classroom and also the work that I'm currently doing with schools across the world.
Okay, so now we are going to know a little bit about who you are. So I have 3 questions for you, and those 3 questions are on the screen. Where are you now? So are you in Asia, North America, South America, Europe, Middle East, Australia, Africa? Please feel free to choose where are you currently. What is your role? Are you a teacher coordinator? Are you in a leadership position? Or are you playing a different role? And then it would be very interesting to hear if you changed your assessment during online learning. And let's see together, I'm giving you a kind of a 1 minute to fill and to complete those questions. And then I'm going to share the results with everyone. Remember, so everyone, when you are texting in the chat, please choose all panelists and attendees so everyone can connect and can see what do we have. I would like to remind also everyone, this webinar is also live on our Facebook page. So this is also an opportunity for other people to watch and to attend if they didn't register and if you want to invite someone to watch us live. Okay, I'm going to end the polling now. I'm going to share the results with everyone. And Duane, as you can see, we have 60% are in Asia. We have some people in North America, 1%, 3% for South America, 6% are in Europe, Middle East, 25%, some people in Australia, and then in Africa. Duane, you have 74%, they are teachers, and I'm sure we will be addressing the teacher perspective and the content of this session. 14% are coordinators, 10% are leadership team. And then it would be interesting to know who are the other. Maybe in that chat you can tell us, are you teacher assistant, parents, a specialist teacher? And then 84% from our attendees, they changed their assessment online.
Yeah. Well,
so Duane, you can just click on close the poll on your screen and we are ready to continue with you for the following slide.
Fabulous. Yeah, because as you were saying, Ali, you know, it's great to have all the different combinations of teachers, coordinators, leadership, because part of the presentation today is really for us all to take a bit of an inquiry stance, looking at some of the different, I suppose not even different, but creative ways that we can look at making assessment in a virtual online space meaningful, practical. It might not always reflect what has been taught. Maybe it's going to be more about the skills that we've noticed, and because we've had some intimate times with the students, probably more so in some cases than we've had in the classroom. And all those experiences that they've had, they tell a story. And I want to use that as my lens today. You know, it's the story about the time when they've somewhat been disconnected from the normal, from what they've known for school to be. So, and finding different ways to make them feel more connected. So that leads me, I suppose, into the guiding questions, where we're going to look at what your current situation is, the purpose of assessment in online learning. Are there ways that we can present a summary of that learning? And look, when I say summary of learning, I'm not talking about sort of report cards. I'm not talking about summative assessment. I'm talking about packaging up everything the students have been engaged with while they've been in our virtual online remote learning space, and giving it back to them and giving it as a testimonial really about what they've been doing and what we've been noticing. What might our profile of learning look like? And we'll also get the chance to have a little bit of a think about, well, obviously quite a high percentage of you've already started thinking about modifications to assessment. So it'll be great to hear your contributions around some of the ideas that you've already had. But when I was looking around and searching and researching and asking colleagues, one of the things that came out a lot was this great opportunity now, more than probably we've ever had before, to really re-image what assessment looks like in the early years, particularly things like, why don't we start doing things that we know work, but we don't always do, you know, or do we stop doing things we know that really don't work, but we just continue doing them because of what we've been doing in the past. So this is all about giving the opportunity for you to make permission to try something new. And that's from a lot of the workshops or the webinars I've been listening to. That seems to be one of the things that everyone's agreeing on, that this is time to make permission to try something a little bit different. Because the landscape is, you know, it really has changed. And we have to ask ourselves at the end of this, what really matters? What really matters when we're presenting some type of assessment or summary of learning back to our learners, and how do we go about that? So those guiding questions will sort of help us work through some of those challenges. But also, I'll use assessment and documentation interchangeably, because as you know, in the early years, documentation is the heart of our core business, what we do well. And some of the different ways that we can use the documentation that we've currently got in place. All that stuff we've started collecting on Seesaw or whatever other platform you might be using, and how can we sort of package that and present it to the students to help them feel connected back into, you know, that space that they're all very familiar with, called school. I love this quote. Many of you may have read it or seen it before, by Loris Malaguzzi. And I'll just give you a moment to read through that. As you're doing that, I've put in brackets "at school," because I think when Loris Malaguzzi sort of framed this, remote online virtual learning probably wasn't, you know, something that was thought much about. But I think the heart of this quote can really be applied in our current situation. You know, every time we step away from a face-to-face online lesson, I'm sure there's times where, I really should have captured that image or captured that moment. And that's one thing, you know, if you've followed the work of Reggio about building up that image of the learner. And look, in many ways, we can continue to do the same in an online virtual space because the children are still present. They're still in the room in many ways. And it's finding the way to capture that story that they're trying to tell. And one thing I don't want us to sort of let go of are those really important values and beliefs that we hold on to as early as educators. Keep them forefront because every decision that we make really should stay true to some of those beliefs that we have. Okay, so we might not get 100 languages during this whole process, but even if it's something we've noticed about the child that's different that we've seen them do before in a classroom situation, are they, from the work that they've been doing online, have we noticed them being more problem solvers, or are they being more curious, or have they been more part of the community than we've seen them before? So those are the things that stand out. They're the things that we need to hold on to and really turn them into that active living testimonial of what we're noticing and trying to make sense of. I mean, the same thing we do, as our core business in the classroom, taking some of those principles and saying, hey, yeah, look, that works here. How can we actually turn it around and help it work in this new situation we found ourselves in? So I love this because I think this reminds me a lot about, yeah, the world does look different right now, but really it doesn't mean we have to change what we've done in the past. Okay, the implementation of it might look different, but it doesn't mean our philosophy has to change. Some of those values that are, have allowed us to get through a typical day in the classroom at school certainly still apply here, because we're still bringing the learning to the students based on what we know about them, their interests, their styles of learning. And we're still aware that, okay, curriculum exists. There's still certain checks and balances we need to be thinking of. So today's about exploring what some of the approaches to assessment might look like. And again, as I said before, your contribution will be really valued. So I've been thinking about, okay, so it takes a community of learners, and that's what we are as educators, to make sense of the purpose of what we're doing right now. So keep those ideas coming in the chat box, because it'd be great to hear your contributions as well. I must say that from a lot of work I've been doing with schools around this particular topic recently, assessment was sort of the last thing to be considered. We were so caught up in the face-to-face instruction. What does that look like? What does that look like for the learner? How are we keeping them connected? How are we involving families? What type of technology are we using? And the assessments tended to be the last thing we were thinking of. And whilst it might not look perfect now, I don't think there's any right approach to it, but some of the principles and ideas I'll suggest today are not just applicable in the online virtual space. It's also good practice for us when we do return to the classroom that we can make use of in our everyday situations. So saying that, I'd like you to start contributing to this image. What does this image remind you of? What does this image make you think? Just take a moment to consider it in the context of what you're currently doing now, and maybe what your next steps might be when school actually does resume. Once you've typed
Duane, I'm getting the answer. Diversity, happy faces, equality, happy learning, inclusion. Every child is different. Communicator, creativity, learning is fun, happiness, unique, perspective, freedom of expression, emotions, voice and choice, independence, agency, essential agreements.
Yeah, all the
Yes, personal choices, autonomy, imagination, children are colorful, engaged learning, originality, and the list goes on and on.
Thanks, Ali, because what I wanted to inspire from this image was that as much as things might look differently now. And it might feel that you've been to the moon and back with this online learning situation. There is a rainbow, there's something to look forward to. And you know, how we get there with assessment is really your personal choice. So you know your learners well. You know some of the tasks that you've been completing with them. So, but alongside that, those hands to me represent all the stakeholders. It's not just the teacher making these judgments or summaries about how students are learning. Why not involve the children in co-constructing some of the different ways that they might want to know about what they've been doing in this online space, and getting the parents involved as well, because you know many families have been involved in what we've been doing and how we've been presenting the lessons to the students. So it's about the co-creation of looking at different ways so that everybody, every stakeholder can be a part of coming together and really taking the time to think a little bit about what assessment could look like. It goes back to the quote from Loris Malaguzzi as well, that, you know, getting the parents involved, and also that the way we present the learning back should be pleasing to the teacher and the child as well. So it's all those different contributions, I suppose, taking all those different frozen moments that you've been collecting during your journey, working online with the children, and turning them into a bigger narrative. And I think that's the thing that's the key message from me. If there's nothing else you take away from it, that how do we, you know, taking all those frozen moments as an insight into that bigger narrative, and that everything that the students have contributed during in this journey, they all count. But I suppose the question we need to ask ourselves on top of that is, what really matters when we're presenting it back to the students in a way that really captures what they've been doing, and not just what they've been doing, but what they've been knowing and what they've been learning as well. It all counts towards the bigger picture. So how can we together show that what students know, what they know? I mean, that's the million-dollar question, you know? But really, don't we reflect on this statement in a face-to-face classroom situation as well? We're always asking ourselves, is our assessment authentic enough? Is it differentiated enough? Has it captured the true story of the learner? Well, you know, whatever the processes you work through, you know, in a school situation, when you're designing assessments, or when you're collecting evidence, or when you're making a summary about the learning intervals the children are being engaged in, you know, this continues to, I suppose, roll around in our heads. And it's an important thing to think about, you know, how is it being used effectively to tell that story? So there's so many things that have been going on. What are the things that are, I suppose, giving us a bit of a taste for what the assessment could look like? Okay, it's been challenging, assessment, very challenging in an online environment, particularly in the home environment. The frequency of it, the breadth of it, even feedback. I'm sure you've had the chance, you've really thought about how to re-image feedback when you're giving it to students. But in reality, what we know about our learners might work for some schools and students and not for others. So for me, I suppose it's not about, you know, it's not about taking something that the school down the road has done, or something that you found on Facebook or Twitter, although some of those are very effective and might work in your situation. I want to go down that pathway of looking at things that you've found work effective in the past, and how can we adapt those to make them more effective in the virtual online space. Because there's so many conditions attached to that. You know, parents working from home, some students don't have access to devices. So how are we actually ensuring that there's some equity also in the assessment tasks that we provide? This is how we do it. We give ourselves permission to accept whatever you feel capable of during this time, and consider what your appropriate approach to assessment might look like. Because again, you know, what works for you might not work for the teacher um, in another school. So think of it as an approach, because really this is something that you've probably given a lot of thought to. But ultimately, it's our responsibility to get the students over the finish line. Some schools that's already happened. Some schools have returned. I think I heard last week in that presentation, 20% of schools have returned back to face-to-face. So each context is a little bit different. And if it has to be a blended approach, that's also a consideration. But you know, some schools are waiting for the chance for children to go back and take assessment to a different level. But while we've got them there now, we have to make sure that whatever you do your best with what you know and can do, and collaborate with students and families. I think often we find that if we get input from families or from students about, you know, how or what they would like to know about their learning, some of us feel that it's you know, it makes us a little bit inadequate or a weakness when we put it out to the universe for input. But I think it's actually a clever thing to do. You know, you've had this very long block of time where students and families have been part of your virtual classroom. So give them some voice as well in having input into, you know, what do they really want to know? What is important to them as far as, you know, this time that they've been spending you know, online. And come up with some protocols. I mean, those protocols that you might use now, you know, you can apply them equally well back when you go into the classroom as well. So get some ideas from all those involved, because online learning is hopefully something that it's a one-off. We might not necessarily have to approach it again, but what we should consider is that it's here now, and while it's here, we've got to get through it in the best way that we possibly can. And hold on to what really matters. Is it something that we feel, you know, has more weighting to give students some feedback or some summary about their learning from their social emotional perspective? Or is it the skills that we've noticed during their online learning that have been a standout? And it can be different for every child. I don't feel that we need to have one unified approach to assess or to present a summary of learning for every individual learner. I mean, it could be something that that we personalize as well, and come up with some different ways, which I'll share shortly, that we can go about doing that. So if we think about where you are now, and you've had a range of synchronous and asynchronous learning taking place, you've given student feedback, you've observed them online, you've done some conferences, maybe you've contacted the families by telephone week by week, getting a bit of a feel for how students are working in the virtual classroom. With maintaining relationships being a bit of a priority, what are your thoughts now about assessment in your current context? What are the things that you feel really matter? The things that are important for us to hold on to and communicate back to those stakeholders.
So Shivani is telling us inclusive assessment, assess life skills, differentiated. Nadia is saying they need to be clear and specific. Gabriela is agreeing on the idea of supporting the families, emotional and life skills, ongoing differentiated, giving each child a personal time, giving them a voice, growth and learner agency, appreciation. And those are some of the keywords that came in the chat: open-ended, based on discussion, ongoing questioning, direct and simple. It's about the space-time readiness. We want assessment to be connected to real life, one-on-one, using quizzes, general talk. And then I will keep the people continuing in the chat, and then I go back to you, Duane.
Yeah, no, because I think out of all those responses, I mean, and some of the protocols, as I said before, that I've helped schools to develop, just some guiding principles around what your assessment for in the earliest. I mean, it's really about keeping it simple and having a bit of a purpose as well. You know, what are you actually intending to get out of this opportunity to speak with children, to get them to respond to an image or a photograph, or collect a photograph that they might have been using in a particular face-to-face lesson? Why are we doing it? And whatever we come up with the answer to that question, then I think we can get a little bit of a better idea of where we want to go. But it is about your own professional judgment. I mean, teachers know. Teachers know in the space, whether it's online or face-to-face in the classroom, you know yourselves, you know your subjects, you know your students, and you know what works. So whatever that might be, they're the things that really matter. And don't be afraid to seek feedback from others. It's a good starting point, a good springboard into thinking, okay, well, this might work for you. I might do a little bit differently. And what's actually working for the parents as well? Are there certain things that are helping them to build a better, excuse me, not a better, a different image of their learners? Because when you think about them sometimes being the guide on the side during our online lessons, it might be giving them a different perspective of what they're noticing about their own children. And those things are important to collect from the parents as well, because that's where it becomes this summary of the learning that's taking place. You know, our input, the students' input, and also the parents' input. We can build up this image of the online learner, for want of a better terminology, but building up this image of all those different components together. And look, be kind to yourself, because, you know, assessment in any context, whether it's face-to-face or online, can be quite grueling. And we need to be kind to ourselves, and not to make, you know, not to overcompensate for the fact that we haven't had that constant, you know, communication or interaction with children. So it might be, you know, tempting to do, you know, videos and photographs and various other ways of representing the learning or giving feedback. But my advice would be just to keep it simple and stick to one or two tools that you might find valuable and useful. And I've got some suggestions on those a little bit later on as well. So why? And this is one of the things that, you know, I really didn't want to start with. I wanted to give a little bit of a sort of provoke your thinking a bit around some of the other challenges that that might come along with assessment in the earliest, particularly in the online space. But why during remote learning? Why is it important for us to really assess student learning? Ali, I didn't put a chat symbol next to this. And it probably does align with a little bit before about the priorities that we spoke in the last chat. So I mean, feel free to add your ideas, but I just want us to keep this sort of seed in our mind as we work through the rest of the presentation. Why are we actually doing this? And it goes back to the purpose. Once I think we're very clear in our own context, the purpose of why we're doing this, then we can come up with some different strategies that are going to work for us.
The chat is very fast, but
okay.
Some of the messages is about to check the learning, to see the progression, to feed forward, and to understand the learning of the student.
Yeah, I think the progression is one that I found a lot of my colleagues have found the most valuable, because you know, they're tracking individual students daily through Seesaw, and that's their tool of preference at the moment. So it's there, it's in their face, and they can see the growth and the progress of the children. But just think in the context of the different layers of assessment in our usual context. You know, it's there for communication, it's there for curriculum shaping, it's there for professional development. But the three areas that I've sort of highlighted for us in this online virtual context is, yeah, okay, so it has to have an element of communication. We know that's important. but it's also there to allow us to be able to celebrate and share some of the noticings that we've had. And it could go back to what I said before, some of the learning processes and the progresses of the learning, which some of the participants have already outlined, but also collaboration. And this is the one that excites me the most. It's about that shared meaning making within the learning community, because we have, in many cases, you know, all stakeholders involved, the parents, the teacher and the child. So having that shared meaning within the learning community is a great opportunity for collaboration. So I suppose that goes back to a little bit of the purpose, the why. And I think once you work out your why, and it could be multiple whys, then that helps us to shape some of the different ways that we can present the learning back to the families, back to the learning community even. If you've been to any of my presentations before, I think you'll find one of the things I love about this quote is that you know, it helps teachers to really think a little bit about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and maybe perhaps they'll do something different than what they've done before. But because this might not be possible, how about you know, stepping aside? Well, actually, that's not true, because I'm sure every time you flick off the screen at the end of a lesson or the end of the day, you're actually doing this, not physically in the room, but in the virtual classroom. You know, you are observing carefully what the children have been doing, and maybe then understanding a little bit more about how they're doing it and what they're learning. So, I mean, this is sort of multiple contexts, and whilst it might not be physically possible, you know, at the same time, you know, you will have many opportunities to collect that evidence that you're going to be able to share with the learning community, that community, and celebrating and collaborating, all of those things that we've thought of before. I suppose one thing that I've noticed when planning for this webinar, a lot of I said this at the beginning, a lot of the best practice that us as early years teachers apply in our everyday core business are still in many ways applicable in the online context. It's just how we actually go about it. It's more about the implementation of, or what we get out of that situation, because dialogue is still important. You know, I'm sure every time, you know, you finish a face-to-face or a small group lesson online, you know, that silent dialogue or even open dialogue with learners, with individuals, helps you create a deeper meaning of what the children have been saying, and how that active listening is still very much part of what we're doing. In fact, I think maybe active listening is a little bit more appropriate here, because we're actually there face to face with them, and we're getting that, building up that meaning, a deeper meaning of what they're doing, because we're in closer proximity with them in many ways. Now, look, this you may be familiar with as a graphic from the Ontario Education Department, when they talk about pedagogical documentation and how, you know, all the different elements of collecting evidence, capturing student voice, you know, come together and create this story, this narrative, this image of the child. But in the same way, what we've been doing online, I'm sure many of those things you've been tapping into, the photos, the videos, students taking pictures of artifacts, maybe some of your own observational notes. I mean, they're all still very important. But at this point, I want to ask the question, you know, you've done that, you've got the evidence, now what? What are we going to be able to, you know, what do we really want to hold on to? And what do we really want to do with all this information that we've collected? One thing I thought a lot about actually is, so you've got the videos, you've got the learning stories, you've got the conferences. If these are the things that you've been using in a physical classroom space, how about we take one of those or some of those and then take something old, something we're familiar with, and turning it into something new? something new in the context of online learning. For example, the videos that children are submitting, if that's something that we're familiar with using in our classroom context, how are we using them in an online virtual space? Are we archiving? Are we putting them into a summary document where children can watch them back and show a progress of their learning? What are some of the different ways that you're taking, I suppose, some of the tools that you've used in the past, and going back to that 84% that said they've modified or changed their assessments, what are they actually looking like? So maybe you could share some of your own examples of something old that you've used and turned it into something new. It'd be great to hear some of the responses, Ali.
So waiting for those answers, we had the people agreeing on your whole idea of stepping back, but then I had two questions asking how we can help the parent to step back. So when the students are doing the assessment, they have less input from the parents. So any tip on that?
The only tip I would have on that, if it's an assessment that you really want to collect authentic evidence around a student's response that has the potential to get parents involved, my advice would be don't do it, because it's really difficult in a home environment to say to the parents, don't do that, or don't write, or don't give them a response, or don't prompt them here. If that's even a hint of going to happen, then I'd have to ask the question, is that assessment really going to be effective in the online? Look, I really think, children at this age in the early years, they're going to have a very long time in their education history, career, to have us collect that evidence when they get back to school. So my advice would be just to hold off, build up as much of an image of the learner as you can from the other skills that they're showing or the other dispositions of learning that they're showing, and use those to tell the story. Because I'm hoping as the outcome of all of this that we're really, even back at the school level, we're going to really rethink about some of the purposes, some of the needs of the assessments that we've been doing previously, and put them through a filter. I'm going to ask you to do that at the end of this session. Put all the assessments that you've used in the past through a filter, and whatever spits out the bottom as being the most effective and the most important, the one that really matters, tells the story of the child, that's the one you should hold on to. The rest, you can park for the moment.
Okay, Duane, thanks. Going back to that chat, plenty of people are sending messages. They mentioned CISO, e-portfolios, using Padlet, using Flipgrid, recording audio videos, and all this is allowing for very unique e-portfolios for the students, and it's really showing the progression. We had also a comment on how to encourage parents to step back, sharing with them the academic honesty if the school has an academic honesty policy.
Great. I like the idea of that unique approach to portfolios, and and that's what it's about. It's coming up with something unique in this situation or something creative. But I really, whatever you decide or whatever becomes part of your new practice, think about, does it start to filter through some of these checks and balances that we know are effective in our approach to assessment in early years? Is it allowing us to imagine or theorize about what the children are learning or what they're doing? How can we use it to present evidence, check it, analyze? Does it allow us to analyze and interpret? If it's one-dimensional, it's not giving us the information or any information about the learning that takes place, whether it's face-to-face or online, we really have to ask the question, should it be part of our assessment schedule? Is it informing us, offering us different, next steps in learning? And is it allowing us to design for the next day of learning as well? So not necessarily every piece of assessment or every approach to assessment is going to tick all those boxes, but really, again, it goes back to what really matters for you at the time that you're working with children in this online space. Do you want it to be able to use at some stage to present evidence back to the learner? Or is it important for you to have it to analyze and interpret some of the learnings and doings that the children are engaged in? So that's one of the filters I was talking about. But what about the how? So this, as I said before, from that graphic from Ontario, there's lots of different ways that I'm sure you've been presenting a summary of learning, whether it's daily, at the end of the week, at the end of a unit. And by the sounds of it, a lot of people are thinking in ways that they never thought might be possible because of the situation we've been put in. And if it's fit for purpose, and if it's telling you the story that you really want to tell, then hold on to it. Because those photos, artifacts, you know, I think we can get parents involved there. Parents, and they can submit photos of children at play. And why not, as the parents are submitting those photos of children at play at home, get them to make some noticings. Get them to make some comments about what they're seeing happening at home in the learning. And that's a nice way to actually start that sustained dialogue between families and teacher. So I really like the idea of having some type of toing and froing of information between the home and the school. Because as I said before, parents are developing a different perspective in many ways about their child as learners. You might have a series of collective artifacts that they've been using, phone calls. Ali mentioned before, you know, the importance of having a phone call from your teacher, interacting, because let's face it, let's take a break from Zoom or Google Meets for a while, put down the screen and pick up the phone and talk to the children or the parents by telephone. I think it's just a nice way to take a break every so often. And because I feel that sometimes, you know, that sort of intimate one-to-one opportunity you have to speak with families or with children, you do get a bit of better sense of what's going on in their sort of learning life. And even have students video some of the things that they've been wondering about, or the learnings that have been taking place from them. And get them to share that with the teacher, with maybe a little bit of a comment or a voiceover of what's happening in that space, because I think it's important for us to build up this whole digital repertoire, as somebody mentioned before, digital portfolio of many different ways that students are displaying or showing their learning, so we can tell that story. Now, I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with Adobe Spark. If you are, great. Please feel free to type in some of your suggestions. But I've had schools working with Adobe Spark to capture, as I said before, all those frozen moments that contribute to the bigger narrative. All the pictures, all the videos, and putting them together as a bit of a summary. It can be time consuming, but I think if you're familiar with it, we've used it regularly, we come up with shortcuts as a way of telling that story. And Book Creator is another great example. Book Creator as that platform for dropping in photos and videos, comments. I mean, it really just needs to be a starting point. And if you're looking at using that lens of communicate, celebrate, and collaborate, some of these tools are great also, because you're getting multiple perspectives, multiple dimensions of the learning that's taking place, and then packaging it, and it's ready at the end of the learning, end of the week, end of the unit. But I feel that sometimes this is a great opportunity for us to also rethink some of our digital approaches to portfolios back in the classroom as well. Because if we hand the ownership of the collection of the evidence and the data over to the children, it's that co-creation that we're really looking for. I mean, you could give them a template to complete. You know, ask them to send in a photo about something that they were doing in the morning or the end of the day. Give them some prompts. What are you doing? What are you learning? How do you know? And get them to make some comments around those, and keep those as a sort of a digital collection of the different responses, so that students can see their own progress as well. At the end of the presentation, I've got two sort of hacks that might help you when you're thinking about building up that digital folio of the different ways students would have been engaging. So, what can be assessed? I purposely left this to last because often we go in too quickly thinking, okay, well, we've been doing all this work around, you know, numbers or some type of literacy skill or a writing skill, and we become very focused on that as a sort of a one-dimensional way of talking about some of the noticings we've had. I want to open up and say that what can be assessed has so many different opportunities associated with it. And a lot of the participants pointed these out in the beginning about some of our priorities. You know, the skills, the dispositions of learning. You know, it could be how students engage with certain online literacy and numeracy activities. It could be simple observations or a series of images or photos that the children have been working on. But whatever it is, I think the important element is to think about how we're getting parent and children perceptions and feedback based on the compilation that we've been making. Because those are the things that are actually going to add more power to all of what we've been doing. Because it's really about building your own image of the learning. Thinking about what are the different reactions that you've had when you view and you interpret the evidence being presented by the students. It's the same as we have in a classroom level when we're working with children, that silent dialogue that goes on in our head. It's telling us a story, it's telling us something, it's helping us make deeper meaning about what we're seeing. So as we're having that silent dialogue, ask yourself, was there a theme or a thread that was more prominent or more outstanding than for a particular children or a particular group of children? Were there things like, you know, the learner profile that you noticed over and above what they were doing with their literacy task or their maths task? Did you notice more about their approach to learning? Were children presenting some of their own research in response to the work that you were doing with them? Did you notice a different way that they were communicating their responses and their ideas that you haven't seen before? So it's those little points of difference that I think are important to feed back to the children, to present back to the children. You know, did you notice their confidence, their cooperation, creativity, curiosity, whatever it might have been? But when you know, having that silent conversation with yourself, saying, yeah, look, this child has been pretty much a risk taker throughout this whole journey. That's the thing I'm going to focus on. This is what I really want. And I know that they were being a risk taker because here's some of the evidence I've got. And then how do you package that? Do you put that into a learning story, or, you know, to get them to create a video themselves around, okay, I've noticed you being a risk taker. Can you show me the different ways you've been a risk taker during our online learning? What does that actually look like? So putting it back onto the children as well. But I prefer having us look at some of these different skills, attitudes or approaches or profiles over and above giving feedback on how they were doing with some of the more academic elements of the task, which, you know, while we might notice a little bit out of our control when we're in a virtual online situation. But regardless of how you go about this, you know, I think my advice would be to make sure that you have any response back to the families, that there's several, you know, images or anecdotes or ways of presenting their learning at different stages of completion. You know, so what was happening in the beginning of their learning? What did you notice during the learning, at the end of the learning intervals? so that, you know, it's a transcription of the child's discussion, their comments. They can all be the documentation panels that you might be used to doing in a physical space. I mean, how could we repurpose those and make those more of something we use in our an online or virtual space? But also the comments from the parents, because I'm sure parents, depending on what platform you're using, you know, they're making comments daily about the child's learning, either by email, by telephone, through their Seesaw posts. So they could be part of the bigger story as well. So just before I sort of wrap up with some practical suggestions that you could consider when you're, you know, either signing off the year or thinking about, okay, well, this online learning might happen again when we start back next year. What are some of your initial ideas on the different ways that you might share a summary or interviews, a summary of their learning at this stage? And look, if you've already had a chance to do that in your own context, share those with Ali as well. It'd be great for us to all hear some of the suggestions that you've had.
So while I'm waiting for the chat to come, I have a question for you, Duane, so I don't keep all the question for the end. Can you tell us a little bit about the amount of screen time for the early years? What is your recommendation?
Wow, now that's a can of worms, isn't it? Hey, I'll be careful what I say here. If it was my view of the world, I would be saying that it would have to be limited somewhere between, look, depending on how much screen time they have at home, but if it was for the purpose of online learning, I'd be going no more than 15 to 20 minutes per day, to be honest. As far as face-to-face, you know, that face-to-face time, but then, okay, maybe another 15 to 20 minutes if they're doing some research or something as well. Look, some of the suggestions the participants made before about life skills, I think the whole sort of balance between synchronous and asynchronous learning should be balanced between, you know, the real stuff that's around the home, that children can apply some of the skills and concepts we want them to learn, and balance that out with a little bit of screen time to sort of set the direction on what they can do and how they can go about it. If I had to say, Ali, you know, I wouldn't be encouraging any more than 30 minutes, but, you know, a lot of people have different views on that.
True.
But I'd be happy to hold my hand up and say 30 minutes would be enough for my child.
Now, going back to the chat and your question, some people are saying that we are celebrating with the parents, we are making PowerPoints, reflection photos to share them as well, to record them. Parents should also take notes and help us. And then people also are mentioning about their experience about the screen time. So the answers varied between 15 minutes to 1 hour, and people are mentioning the importance also of a break and not just sitting in front of the screen for this whole long time. Okay.
Yeah, no, I've seen a lot of different approaches to presenting that summary of learning, you know, particularly this time of the year. And yeah, it would be great, you know, it would be really great if we had the opportunity to put some of these ideas together and create a sort of a platform at some stage, but maybe that's for another world. But look, ask yourselves about your role in all of this. Okay, when we started this emergency remote learning, we had to put ourselves in, so what am I intending to get out of this? But now in response to assessment, what do you intend to get out of this? What's your role? Are you intending to communicate? Is it about celebrating? Do you want to present that narrative to help reconnect students where they might have felt disconnected from learning? Is it a capturing of the different skills or dispositions of the learner? Is it just an offering of a commentary back to the families? Or is it a way of responding to some of the individual needs and interests that you've come across? Look, I would limit that to one or two. I mean, this is your filter, really. Your filter to say, hey, and be consistent. If you feel that whatever approach to assessment you're going to use is about communicating a narrative, then keep that consistent throughout, because then it tells you know, it shows that progression, it tells that story, it's that living testimonial of what the child has been doing. So you probably think, okay, there's a lot of information I've collected. So just to wrap it up, here's some, I suppose, some hacks or suggestions of what you might sort of, that silent dialogue that goes on inside your head, asking yourself, what do you actually see in front of you about this evidence about this child? What do you think is going on? Not just going on in the moment, or it could be, but what do you think's been going on over the last 3 months? What are the things that you've been getting? What meaning, and what are you understanding about the student as a learner? What meanings you're getting from all this evidence? And so what does it make you wonder? And when you find out that wondering, that's the thing that we need to start communicating back to the families and getting some input from the children. This is what I'm wondering about your learning. You as a researcher, I saw you doing this. I think you're trying to investigate it. I wonder if this is something that tells me a little bit about you as a learner, and even pose it as a question. And you know, again, that's that opportunity for parents to also say, yeah, okay, so he was wondering this, but she was also wondering this in, you know, in another project that you may not have access to, because, you know, we don't have that contact of what's going on in the home all the time. So the importance of having parents have some contribution is important as well. Or I like this one. This is the one I'm going to sign off on. So about this learner, this learner that I was very familiar with face to face in a physical environment. About this learner, I used to think this, but now having access to them in a virtual online space, now I think and understand a little bit more. And this is my evidence. And present that evidence back to the learner and ask them to co-check it with you. Is this what I really think? You know, this is what I think. Tell me a little bit more, and get their input as well. So I suppose I really want to end on this thing about your filter. You know, put everything in there that you've used, face-to-face, online, whatever it might be. Put it through the filter and think about the one thing that drops out of the bottom that says to you, this is the one that's really given me helped me build up the image of this learner, either face-to-face or online. And that's the thing I'm going to focus on. Other things might count, but this is the one I'm really going to put my time and effort into, because it really matters. And it really matters not just to you as a teacher, but it really matters to the student and also the parent as that learning community. So, opportunities and considerations. I've seen this is a great idea where at the end of the school year, or teachers who've been involved in that child or that class particular learning journey for 3 months have sort of provided a personal message, or in their PowerPoint that they presented back to them, just a sign off for the year message, or just even a collage of all the faces to remind us, so yeah, okay, there were days when the PE teacher was involved, or there were days when the music teacher was part of this. Video, individual, whole class, a narrative, captions, maybe not, personal messages, but I think most importantly, and we should owe this to the fact that, you know, students have spent, and families have spent quite a bit of time being part of this with us, an opportunity for them to respond. And, you know, when we send home a report card or something from at a school level, we don't always get a chance for them to respond. So this might be a way forward. Try it out now. See if it gives you any more information than you've already presented, because that might be the thing to hold on to and think about, okay, back in my school context, I really want everyone to be a part of this co-creation of assessment and responding to some of the different things that I'm making those judgments and summaries about. So, final reflection, the world may look different right now, but that doesn't mean our philosophy has to change. Just the implementation of it.
Duane, this was really very interesting. We answered the question what, why, how. I still have 3 more questions, so if the participants would like to stay with us for the next 5 minutes, so we wrap it up together. The question number 1 from Rachel. Hello, Rachel. She's asking, can you give us one idea how we can engage the parents in the online learning?
Engage the parents in online learning or online assessment?
Online learning.
Online learning. You know, I feel that the best way, well, if you really want parents to be part of the online learning, they really need to be part of that daily message briefing with that you have with your families, with the children. I know a lot of schools that have a video either recorded or face-to-face, where there's an expectation that at the beginning of the day, both the parents and the children are required to be part of listening to the initial sort of start of the day. If that's not possible because parents are working or parents are, you know, there's multiple children at home, all working different schedules, I feel that at least once a week, there should be an opportunity to send someone, as I said before, with the assessment, send something back to the families as an image of the learning that's taken place and get the parents to respond. They may not be able to be part of it, you know, all the time that the children are online, but at least they've been part of some, you know, have some input into the journey.
Okay.
Other schools out there that might have dealt with that situation might have other suggestions, but yeah, it has to be an expectation, and Ali, it's a culture that has to be built up over time. I feel that you know, 3 months is a very short time to say, hey, parents, you have to be involved. But I feel that if anything we've learned from this, next time we go about this, we'll look at the agreements of how parents have to be part of this in a different way.
Very good. So what do we have next on our slides? I think we have your website.
Yep.
Yes, so we are going to share Duane website, his email, and our follow-up email. We are going to send to you a survey, and then we are going to ask you about how did you find the session, what are the new ideas that you are interested in, and then our final link or our final slide is a slide about fourth generation for education. This webinar is recorded, so you are going to find it on YouTube tomorrow. Follow us on Facebook. I would like to say hello for all the people who are watching us on Facebook now and who were very interactive, asking questions and also answering on Facebook. We are also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you, everyone. We still have around 8 webinars from now till the end of this month. We have also one for early years, play-based learning using the loose part. We have some webinars in Arabic. We have an ATL webinar with Lance King. We have a conceptual webinar with Tanya Latanzio. So please feel free to join us, spread the word. Thanks again, Duane. Participants, all of them are thanking us for this session. And let's stay connected and supporting each other. Thank you.